All right, welcome everybody. Candace from House Warrior is going to be teaching a class on dialogue today, and I'm going to hand it over to her now.
All right. Hello, hello. For recording purposes, hi, I'm Candace. I use any pronouns. I'm calling in from Powhatan Land, otherwise known as Virginia, and I'm very excited to get going today. I'm gonna start us off with a meme video, basically, because I think it's a very funny example of very, very natural dialogue.
I love that color. That's such a happy, beautiful, rich
It almost kind of
experience.
looks like what the Earth looks like when you're a bazillion miles away from the planet Moon.
Yes, I
The
just
planet
squinted
Moon,
at it,
from
and you're
the
right.
Moon, looking
From
back
the
at the
planet
Earth.
Moon. From the planet
Isn't the
Moon.
Moon a star?
No, the Moon is the planet, darling.
The Sun is a star. Is
Well,
the Moon really a planet?
The Moon is a planet.
Don't look at me
honey.
like that.
It's
The Sun is
it's
a star.
Planet.
Is the Sun not a star?
I don't know what the Sun is.
The Sun is
we
a
don't
star,
know what
isn't
the
it?
Sun is.
The Sun is a star. The Moon is not
The
a planet.
Moon
I
is
knew
a
it.
planet.
I knew it. You were
Excuse
trying
me?
to take me
No.
down that road.
Wait,
the Moon is not a planet.
Me, Chunky, if you're listening to
This
me,
is
you have
Rosebud.
to Google the Moon.
Someone,
okay?
I can guarantee you someone's Googling right now.
The
Because
Moon
I
is
knew
such
it was
a
not
planet.
a
I
planet.
can't
The
even
Moon
stand
is
it.
not a planet.
What else is it if it's not a planet?
It is not. I believe it's a star or something.
It's
it is not a
moon. It's a moon.
Didn't you do that thing in grade school where you had
The
to name the
moon.
planets, and there was Uranus and there was Saturn and the one with the rings and and then the Earth and the Moon is never in there, dude. It's not a planet. All right, here, look. This is key lime.
I don't know.
I
I don't
feel
know
like
what it is besides.
sometimes,
What is
though
it?
I am
Baseball or
educated,
something?
I exposed
what is
during
it?
this
Cheese?
show
Come on, it's a
that
planet.
this blonde of mine could be real.
Okay.
The Moon is what?
A natural
moon is a
satellite.
natural
but
satellite.
things live on it.
What's
that
that
means it's a
mean?
planet. I don't
Is that
know.
what Google said?
I don't know what
No,
it
I don't
says.
like that at all. I don't even
Me
know what
either.
that means.
So that is our
I haven't actually stepped away yet. That was hilarious.
yeah. That's our opening introduction to dialogue. I always forget how much that makes me laugh. It was very dangerous to start this with that as our opener. So that's our nice little warm-up of like, what does dialogue sound like in the natural world? It's ridiculous. So before I like go into my major spiel, I would love to hear, what do you want to learn today? Why are you here? Why did you show up?
I just want to quickly comment on that video that
Please.
I'm glad it had a lot of that, people talking over each other, not really letting the other one finish their sentence right away before starting their own talk. And it's very like quick and intermingled. Yeah. I think that's neat. And I think that's not always reflected a lot in movies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As someone who reads scripts on a daily basis for in part for a living, like I often find that in a lot of the theater stuff that I'm doing, there's a tendency among newer writers to shy away from what people call unnecessary words in dialogue. So like I'm thinking specifically of things like ums and uhs and repetitions. And the thing is, it's very rare to find someone who talks in complete thoughts, I feel like. And I think that's what that demonstrated, because they're constantly like repeating things. It's almost like it's almost musical in the way that it's the sort of back and forth and the absurdity of it. Like that's how I feel like the vast majority of people talk, except for with the possible exception being those super cerebral, intellectual, academic types who think before everything they say. But I feel like that's a pretty rare kind of person.
Absolutely. Y'all are hitting like right where I'm going already. I'm so thrilled. yeah,
But-
I guess also Andy, go ahead.
Oh, just to answer your question about what I want to
Please.
learn, that's one of my questions is when we're writing dialogue for fiction, are we writing it like the way those people were talking? Because I feel like that's not the way I hear dialogue in video games and movies. So it feels like there's a disconnect there between how dialogue sounds in real life and how dialogue sounds in fiction.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So
I just realized I didn't answer the question either.
please do.
I'm curious to hear, sort of similar to what Andy was saying about, because I'm personally of the belief, at least when I do theater, that dialogue in 90% of cases should sound like how people talk.
Mm.
I know not like everyone feels that way, and I'm very curious why it would that change in games, because I genuinely don't know. I'm so unfamiliar with games.
Mm.
So I'm genuinely curious about what the if there's a rule or a sort of common practice there.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. That's very good for me to know. That's that hearing that disconnect between like this is how people talk and like how I hear people talking around me versus this is what the written word, the script that shows up in the media I interact with. Like there's a definite disconnect. I have a bullet point on my notes that says, why should you listen to me? I make theater for a living. So Evan, I'm very intrigued to have you in the room for this workshop to talk out that as well, because I'm also very interested in filler words. People really love to avoid them. And they have their place. They have uses. There's a reason that we say them. So
I would agree.
yeah. My degree is in directing, so I'm very story focused. Especially like physical theater, which is interesting when it comes to dialogue. I know Andy had a chance to transcribe a conversation. Evan, did you have a chance? I know you're moving, so probably not.
I didn't have a chance to do that, but I can get out one of my scripts.
Sure.
If that counts.
No, I mean, that's definitely useful. And welcome, Dan. We are just getting started. We watched a clip and are kind of saying why we're here and what we're interested in learning. So welcome.
Awesome, thank you.
So, Andy, would you be willing to read out what you transcribed? It's okay if not.
Yeah, sure, I can do that.
Heck yeah.
All right. So yeah, what I transcribed a YouTube video, and it's two young Asians, I think probably in their mid 30s or early 40s, and they led a former gangster life apparently, and it had some history. And then this is sort of dropping in the middle of the conversation where I guess they're trying to like reconcile. So they sat down together. This is going to be a little awkward. Should I just do both voices, even though it'll be confusing? Is like who's who? Okay,
that's totally fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So right there, I think I need to have clarity to that in my heart, in Jin's life, Jin's eyes. I'm not saying that like, yo, I was ever like an angel in my life, but yeah, I never did harm to no one, right? So, and I say that with peace. So I'm just saying, like, as I'm listening to you share, right? I know you just said, yo, I don't even care what the guy said to me. Yeah. My sights was locked in already, but just hearing that kind of description of the things unfolding, I think to me, that's an important part to clarify is that, no, definitely. I think in my heart, I know that, yo, I've never done anything. I think it was something like you was messing with somebody's girl or something like that. Well, yeah. Well, so to me, I think it is important to, if we throwing this all out there, yeah, no, definitely. You know that, yo, that was never the thing for Jin, it was never the thing for me, which was like, oh, that's someone's girl. I'm on that never, yeah. So, and I'm one of those people that's like, yo, I feel like the more you try to defend something, the more it seems like, why you defending? but at times there needs to be clarity. So that's the only one thing I would want to clarify, right? Because it's important for me, like to know that there was no justification in that, even though you're saying like, yo, it wasn't like I heard that and that's what set me on the path. You know what I mean? Yeah, I was just like, and then I trailed off.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for reading that. People listening, and Andy as well, what did you observe from just Andy's reading of that? Were there, I heard repetition, I heard a lot of yeah, I heard a lot of interruption. What else did we hear?
I'm sorry, Andy, could you read just like the last few lines again? I think I just missed it.
Yeah, no problem. And I don't know if Candace is wanting to, but she can feel free to play the video. It'll probably give better context. Right. Because it's important for me, like to know that there was no justification in that. Even though you're saying like, yo, it wasn't like I heard that and that's what set me on the path. You know what I mean? Yeah, I was just like.
Okay. I think the characters have very clear voices.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty again, it's a little bit difficult because I as someone who does a lot of theater, I struggle without seeing things. But from what I can tell, it feels like the characters, the distinction between them is pretty clear in terms of their voices.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely agree. So, and we've mentioned like that's not a thing that you would generally hear in scripted media of any particular form. You won't hear that kind of interruption. You won't hear that kind of trailing off. Things, I wrote a short list of like things that written dialogue often is. It's often witty or insightful. It's put together. It's on topic and organized, and it will communicate information clearly and concisely. Are there any other trying to think of any other buzzwords that would like definitely fit like written dialogue?
Candace, I think crisp comes to mind with written dialogue.
Yes.
This felt a lot more organic and a bit more exploratory.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like they're kind of coming together, trying to figure something out in process and voice some opinions about who they are and what they're doing. And so I think it was more open-ended. There wasn't like a necessarily point that everything led to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was very organic. It was very unstructured in that way. Andy, did I see a hand or was that?
Yeah, it just kind of echoing off what Danny just said. It occurred to me when I was reading it out loud that for the rest of you, this must be very confusing to hear because it's like dropped out of context. Me even just reading it, I'm just, they're speaking in this like New York urban vernacular, and it's not really clear like what the hell they're talking about. And perhaps that's why conversations in movies aren't necessarily like this, because it's harder for the audience to figure out what's going on.
And yet we got the character, we got a strong tone, even if we don't have the specifics of the situation or the information around it.
Yeah, I like I said, I think that the voice is it was actually fairly clearly laid out.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, it was actually pretty easy to follow.
Yeah, it's surprising how much information we're able to get, even though we're not seeing it and we don't have the full context.
Right.
So
yeah.
Written dialogue has all this wonderful structure to it, but like we're saying, things that people talking often are they're confused, they're confusing, forgetful, scattered, interruption filled, focused on like what is in front of them, what is immediately relevant, contradictory, people will contradict themselves plenty, and repetitive, and all the other things from the first list too. So that it can definitely still be witty, it can still be insightful or put together or organized, but more often than not, like people are going to repeat themselves, people are going to change their minds mid-sentence. these are all things that happen in day-to-day life. And I think we're starting to hit on like why that doesn't show up in media very often is because it's, well, one, it's really hard to write. And two, it's difficult to implement a lot of the time. Because Andy, you messaged me a really helpful question of like, how would I even put interruptions into like a game script where it would still make sense?
Yeah, I struggle when I was writing the transcript. I'm like, where do I put the other character? They're both talking at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that might help in terms of learning some of those things is reading some contemporary plays. And I say that as someone who's done that so much that like I've seen like one common thing is to use backslashes. I've seen that a lot in scripts.
Here, let me.
Those indicate where an interruption is theoretically supposed to occur. But again, I'm speaking purely from a like theater perspective, so I don't know if it's the same protocol in other media.
Yeah, it's very interesting with games, and I would love to see other like what interpretations there are around interruption within dialogue in games. This is an example from a contemporary play. It's called Lunch Bunch. It's by Sarah Einspanier, who I am going to give a shout out here because I took a lot of inspiration for this workshop from their workshop that they taught a year or two ago now. This is one of their plays. This is what this play looks like on the page.
That looks very confusing to me at first glance.
Absolutely. And you'll see like closer to the top, it's more or less in a row. But as we get further down, there's different levels of emphasis based on size. She is really playing with like form in this play.
Candace, I hate to do this to you, but just interrupt the flow very quickly for a second. It's making me think of, are you familiar with any of the work of Lucas Nath? This really just looking at this script like reminds me a lot of that play, The Christians, and how that
play
how that uses like returns and different sized fonts and weird spacing of text to indicate how certain lines should be said.
Yeah, there's definitely like the form that you will see, and particularly in older plays, like, I mean, even going to transcriptions of Shakespeare, because Shakespeare didn't have written play, whatever. But like things like Tennessee Williams and like, so this is another contemporary play called Endlings by Celine Song. And this is very much in the screenplay tradition. It's very much, all right, this is a person who's going, talk, 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 talk. But I think this is a really wonderful example of two characters where it's not a specific, like, it's a very meandering conversation, but we're still learning about like the world they're in, the characters, all these different things. Something that games have a unique like challenge when it comes to like writing their dialogue is they have a lot of other things on top of just like characterization that they need to communicate. There's game information, there's lore and world building, characterization, of course, and then there's also instructions or tutorials, as well as like goals for the player. And I will put like a little like side branch of barks. I don't know how familiar everyone is with those. It's like if you're playing a shooter and someone goes, my leg, like that's a bark. And that communicates a lot of information very, very quickly. Go ahead, Evan.
No, I was just nodding in agreement.
I appreciate the unmuted nod. I'm just like staring at the boxes looking for mutes or unmutes. So yeah, it's a very tricky thing to balance. And some games balance it better than others. I have some examples from beginnings of games that I think demonstrate a lot about a game very, very quickly. For this game in particular, this is the Haunted Island, a frog detective game. See what you pick up around the tone and what kinds of like characters you're going to be interacting with just from this little short bit of dialogue. This is like the second piece of dialogue in the whole game.
What? That's your notes? Those are your only notes? Oh my god. Oh, you finally made it! Thanks for coming on such short notice! I've heard so much about your adventures, I'm a huge fan. Wow, that's very kind of you. When you figured out who was behind the forest theft in Witchtown, I couldn't believe it. I thought nobody would ever solve that mystery. I mean, who steals an entire forest? Oh, you've been following my blog posts? Yes, I'm Mystery Monkey 49. I comment all the time. I even made a funny joke once and you responded. Of course, I remember. Hi, Mystery Monkey 49. Please, Mystery Monkey 49 is my online name. You can just call me Mystery Monkey. Of course. Can I ask you some questions about the case? Questions? Yes. What would you like to know?
So what did we observe just from that short little bit?
It's a very like, obviously it's like very expositional and informational, but at the same time, I feel like even just with the punctuation of that, when Mystery Monkey had the "who steals an entire forest" line, and it was punctuated with a question mark followed by an exclamation point, that sort of all that little line in the middle of all of this sort of expository stuff, expository information, sort of gave us an insight into into their personality. They're, you know, obviously a bit of a, I don't want to use the word goofy, but they're colloquial. At the same time, they're dressed in this like very formal suit.
Yeah, very formal monkey suit. You're right.
Like, so there's a personality there that I think it sort of hints at what we're going to see more from as we play the game more. That this is clearly not just like an objective narrator type person who's going to introduce us, who's just going to introduce us to the controls and stuff. This is someone who's actually this is going to be one of the main people we interact with. They're going to become sort of one of the main relationships with the detective. So even though it's expository, it's also, there's just enough of that personality there for it to sort of make us go, I wonder who this guy is.
Right. Absolutely. Any other observations? Something I like a lot about this whole game in general, and Evan, you definitely mentioned it, with it being colloquial and kind of goofy and silly, is yes, it is very silly on purpose. Like, it's very clearly done to set tone. And I think it also very elegantly communicates a lot about the world in general. These people are talking very casually. Yes, it's a detective and there's a mystery happening, but it's not like someone's about to get murdered, as far as we know. Or if they are, it's like, oh, they came back as a fun ghost. Like, it's not, it's a fun, silly, casual time. And that's communicated very quickly and elegantly. And we also get some world building, like, oh, okay, the internet exists here. These are two people actually talking that have some kind of a relationship. Which is more than I could say about some games. Yeah.
I also find that there's something kind of, in a way, weirdly unsettling about how simplistic the art style is, with how colloquial the tone of this dialogue is. like the art style is so sort of simplified down, and it's made to look, it's very like geometric in a way that to me feels like it suggests it suggests a world that's formal, but the tone of the characters is very informal.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
And that's a there's a cognitive dissonance there that I think is probably intentional, that I actually find kind of like unsettling about this first scene. And I think that that's 100%, I imagine that that's 100% was the developer's intention there, was to sort of create this kind of weird, it gives this sort of weird kind of off-kilter world that it has a unique kind of feel to it.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very unique setting. So this gives us a lot of context, and something I would really want to emphasize in the context of this class is it's less so what you say, but more so how you say it. If we're talking about just the information communicated here, it's like, okay, Frog Detective has a blog. This person follows Frog Detective's blog. Something occurred. Let's find out what it was. But with the more colloquial presentation, we learn that tone that we're talking about. One thing that I will also note that, Evan, you've kind of pointed out, welcome, Jordan.
Hello.
We were just watching a clip from the game Frog Detective, of the Haunted Island of Frog Detective game. And something that I think is really interesting in games like this, and games that have kind of that almost visual novel style, is so much communication happens in body language, and that's something that most games simply do not have available to them. So making sure that the tone you're going for happens within the dialogue and how you present it, the form of how you present it, is extra important in games, because you can't have someone who, especially if it doesn't have voice acting. This game actually doesn't have voice acting. I just chose a Let's Player I like who does nice voices. Without voice acting especially, people just kind of have to guess what tone you're going for unless you tell them what tone you're going for. Here is a lovely example. Does that all make sense before I move on to my next point?
Yes.
Resounding yes.
That's a really astute observation also about body language. I didn't think about that. Because that's like, in theater, we always have that.
Whenever you're in physical space, you learn a lot based on how someone is standing, how they're holding themselves. Especially in games and like sometimes on TV, you'll see people just go off of facial expressions. And it's like, oh, now I'm happy. Whereas like, smiling doesn't mean somebody's happy. Like if you think about like who here has worked a retail job or like a customer service job, sometimes the smile is because you're polite and you're talking to someone who is in charge of you, and you have to make them feel welcome because you will get fired if you don't. That's different. I will also link, there's a really wonderful video about body language and animation in Phoenix Wright, which weirdly has some of the best like body language in most video games, I would argue, despite having like 6 frames of animation at any given point. So here is a related example. And Hades also has an interesting thing that it does with body language, but that's a side note. I'll come back. Hades is a wonderful example of relationship very, very quickly. You learn how Zagreus, our player character, relates to all these different people, even though he literally cannot talk to them, all within a couple seconds. Let's take a look at and just compare the relationships between like these 3 different gods that he meets.
There she is. It's got to be her. Then here goes nothing. In the name of Hades, Olympus, I accept this message.
Hail, noble cousin. Now, let's get you from that miserable place. I'll see that all of us upon Olympus do our part, beginning here with me.
Something we can observe about Athena. She is very formal. She has a very affected type of speaking. She's very put together. Now our next example.
That sound. That was revelry? People having a good time? Well, sure then. In the name of Hades, Olympus, I'll accept this message.
Hey there, Zagman. How's it going? Look, you have got to get here with the rest of us already. We've been saving you a spot. Let me see what I can do. Make life a little sweeter for you in the meantime.
And now we have dude bro Dionysus. Literally, we have like a break in form of, hey there. And then the third example of meeting one of the gods in this game.
That must be a mess. Let's see here. Hi there. In the name of Hades, Olympus, I accept this message.
Why, hello there, little godling. I have to say, you're quite the specimen, and so I've decided I shall aid you for the moment. You interested?
There is no part of her line that is not flirty. And I adore how he reacts to seeing, oh, I'm about to be talking to Aphrodite, of, oh gosh, I must be a mess, of like, I need to clean myself up. There is so much relationship and characterization, like even if you don't have the context of who these gods are, just from like knowing Grecian gods, you know kinda who these people are very, very quickly. Just from, look at that, the 2 boxes of dialogue per interaction. That's it. I think Hades is really just a master of demonstrating relationship really, really quickly and characterization. I just got it. I just got Hades, and I've like in the past 3 days played like 15 hours. It's great. Any other observations just from listening to how these people interact in this situation?
So just to be clear, those voices are like in the game, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I felt like it was smart of the developers to have Zagreus say, like, he varies what he says a little bit each time before he meets them, but for the most part he always says, like, in the name of Hades, Olympus, I accept this message.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the repetition of that is part of what makes it so that when the gods come, we can very quickly figure out who they are within just one, the first line, because he's sort of like a constant.
Absolutely. Repetition is a really, really useful tool in most writing, but especially in dialogue, because the slight differentiations make all the difference, because people will recognize, in the name of Hades, Olympus, I accept this message. But him readjusting his appearance in this tells you about how he relates to Aphrodite very, very quickly. It's really neat. I've been thinking about this specific line for days now. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's actually, like, as short as it is, it's actually really good writing.
It's so packed in. It's really impressive.
And her line is very, like, I almost feel like they could have made her line even shorter.
Mm-hmm. See, the interesting thing with Hades in particular is you only get to hear from the gods when you find one of these random drops. So they are really using up the retail space as much as they can in these situations. They're like, oh, people want to hear from them, but we only have a single dialogue box. Let's pack it in.
Well, her line is like extremely clear about like who she is,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
more so than arguably any of the other characters.
Yeah, it's the nuance to it is something that's very important and I think underrated in a lot of dialogue writing. Of someone will say, "Oh, well, this is the thing that they need, so they're just going to say that." But again, how they say it is very, very, very important. Like Aphrodite here is basically saying like, "Hey, I'm going to help you." If she just said that, that wouldn't tell us much of anything about her. Her flirting in every single sentence here tells us a lot.
I was particularly struck by her use of the word specimen, because it very strongly implies a power that she has over him. Like the idea that she's like only someone who's a god would look on. It's like something that a god would say to someone who's mortal. And it, to me, it has like scientific connotations. And yeah, like that, I found that to be like a very striking word choice. Not in a, and that's not like a criticism. I think it is part of why it's part of what makes her characterization so clear. But I think if she had said like, I think you're quite the chap, or quite the fellow, or the man, if she had used like a more generic wording, it wouldn't have been as effective.
Absolutely. Any other Hades observations before I have another example? Want to leave space if people have thoughts. All right. So how to introduce this? I'm going to just have us watch this short clip. All of these clips that I've shown are from the first like hour of play of any of these games. It's been 6 years since I first saw this particular piece of writing, and I still think about it, and I think it'll be very clear as to why after I play it.
Don't be scared. You own this school. If I wanted, I could blow it up. You're the boss. So what do you want?
I hope you check the perimeter, as my step-ass would say. Now, let's talk business.
I got nothing for you.
Wrong. You got hella cash.
That's my family, not me.
Oh, boo-hoo, poor little rich kid. I know you've been pumping drugs and shit to kids around here. I bet your respectable family would help me out if I went to them. Man, I can see the headlines now.
Leave them out of this, bitch!
I can tell everybody Nathan Prescott is a punk-ass who begs like a little girl and talks to himself.
You don't know who the fuck I am, or who you're messing around with.
Where'd you get that? What are you doing? Come on, put that thing down!
Don't ever tell me what to do! I'm so sick of people trying to control me!
You are going to get in hella more trouble for this than drugs.
Nobody would ever even miss your punk ass, would they?
Get that gun away from me, psycho!
No!
This is the introduction of this blue-haired character in this game. What did we see in this clip?
A conflict, right? She's threatening to go to his and expose him, and then he gets angry in return and retorts.
Absolutely. How old would you think these characters are based on that dialogue?
High school.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that was pretty clear. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, absolutely.
Although I will say, I don't think I know any high schoolers who are actually that articulate.
Yeah. I find this clip fascinating because I don't know a single human being who talks like either of these characters.
Yeah.
She is being threatened with a gun and says, "You are going to be in hella more trouble for this."
I also
When,
like
go
when she
ahead.
said, I was gonna say like I started to get the sense of that when she said the business line. like I don't know anyone who talks that way, but it was clear that like she was using that word in a way that was like half joking. Like contextually it's very clear that like she's using business because it's not really business, it's like criminal. Which is, so that's the point.
Yeah, that's the thing, is I'd argue this is not the best writing, or at least not the best delivery of said writing. But I would say that in the context of this game, I think it gets the job done. And that's something that is useful to observe and take note of in whatever media you're trying to write for. Because it doesn't necessarily have to be natural in order to get your point across or communicate the information that you need. What's up, Dan?
This is something that's been on my mind lately with just some like bad dialogue and bad writing lately. But when it comes to like these sorts of situations that are a bit more serious and potentially like traumatic, right? It can raise a lot of stuff for people that have been in really intense situations. I'm wondering if writers may actually consider that as part of the dialogue. That the fact that the dialogue isn't really totally legit and realistic, it softens the severity of the situation a little bit.
Yeah. No, that's a really important observation. There's a really important question there of what am I actually trying to do with how these characters are talking here? Because if she is her using like being like, "You're gonna get in hella more trouble for this," while being held at gunpoint, does soften the actual situation that's occurring while still having a very heightened situation, which is something that this game plays in a lot. They have very, very dramatic, high stakes situations throughout this game, and setting how characters react to it sets expectations for future situations. Evan, I thought I saw a thought.
Yeah, I was gonna, in response to what Dan was saying about writing about like the fact that the subject matter is so it is so sensitive, because I think about this a lot in my own work, because my personal writing often deals with trauma response. Sometimes what I've found is that the closer the writing is to the way something actually goes down in real life, the in a weird way, the less impactful it can be. Because sometimes what it does is it actually causes me as an audience member to shut down. And that's obviously not a blanket for everyone's experience, but I sometimes find that the more heightened and the more surreal the approach, sometimes even the more vague and more opaque, the stronger the writing lies in the realm of suggestion and implication rather than showing everything and spelling everything out. Sometimes that the stronger it can be. And I just wanted to point that out because that's something that I think about a lot, and grapple a lot with in my own work, is how to approach situations like this in writing.
Absolutely. Dan, what's up?
I was just going to piggyback on that. Evan hit something I thought was interesting. I can't remember the exact words he used. I think it's kind of like you tune out if it's too realistic in a way, if it's too like what you would expect. It's making me think of this game Spiritfarer. I don't know if people have played this at all.
I'm familiar with it. I haven't played it yet.
Yeah, it's you're basically taking people to the other side. You're helping them kind of finish up their life, and it's the characters in the game are actually based off of real people that the developers knew, and so they've injected their life story into them, and it's an incredibly emotional game, and it's really satisfying to play, but you have to be in the right mental headspace for it. And I actually got to a point where I just kind of put it down and like take a break from it because it was just a little too much to handle. And I'm wondering, like looking at Life is Strange here, right? It's the same sort of thing. Is the point for it to be this emotional turmoil type thing, or is it the heightened kind of like adrenaline type stuff that you're getting sucked into? And I don't know how that lays out with a writer. I'm not a writer, so I'm just I'm assuming there's probably some sort of mechanics and tricks being used to kind of look at what is the goal of what you're after, and then how do you convert your language to match that in a way that doesn't misdirect the viewer or the reader.
Has anyone here played Celeste?
I have not. I know about it, but I haven't played it.
Same.
Celeste, I think, is a really, really good example of this because Celeste does it by structuring the entire game around a metaphor. And it's a very simple metaphor, just climbing a mountain, but the way in which, like all the details that you find along the way as you climb further and further up, the more you find out about who she is. Yeah. And because there's this constant metaphor device, there's always this layer that removes it from reality, which I think makes it so that it's the kind of thing that doesn't turn people off of it, even though it's addressing like very serious issues. I also think another example is What Remains of Edith Finch.
Yeah.
Does it in a slightly different way because it's not entirely metaphorical, but it's more like it does it in a way that's so surreal and so odd and so steeped in visuals and visual art and visual juxtapositions that is sort of the thing that creates the distancing, the emotional distancing.
I love those observations. Thank you both. And I'm thinking too, Dan, about like, oh, what are the other like machinations behind like how dialogue is composed to reach a certain goal. And I think that's really interesting. I don't think this is specifically what you're saying, but it's related. I will often see both in like dude bro gamer culture as well as like dating sim culture, there is a tendency to treat characters as if there is a correct or like cheat code reason to say something or do something. And I totally get why that happens in games. There's things to be programmed for that need specific reactions, and like doing something nice is usually the best way to do it. That being said, like humans don't have cheat codes. And I see like particularly a lot of like Dubro gamer spaces that gets forgotten, that really quickly gets forgotten. It's like, how do I min-max this interaction? And I love the games that go into that weird nuance. One game that I think does it particularly well, it's called Scarlet Hollow. It's a, no, don't leave me. I know you're here. You fool. You coward. I can't believe it's taken me away. That's so rude. I'll find the correct link. Is an awesome game called Scarlet Hollow, which is a visual novel. It's a horror game where they have a really interesting dynamic relationship system where, so there's one character who's your cousin and you go into her house and it's like completely trashed. There's like water leaking through the ceiling. There's like mold everywhere. It's gross. And you have the options of like compliment the house or be like, oh, what is this dump? And with the usual kind of like be positive mindset, you're more inclined to, the assumption is like, if you're nice, she'll be nice back. Whereas this character like gets really annoyed with you if you're nice to her about her really dumpy house. And I think there's something really, really cool about this game in particular, because they built out a system that tracks multiple kinds of variables. So it's like realness and like humor and things like that, where it affects how the characters respond to you. And it's a very like complex dynamic system that like, more power to them. I understand why not every game company or game studio would go for that, because it's very labor intensive. But there's something really rewarding about treating characters like humans. I find that really, really wonderful. And I know we're right up at the hour mark, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I'm trying to... One thing I would love to challenge anyone who's writing to do is to play with form and playing with like how interaction happens and how interruption happens. Like Evan was saying, backslashes are often used in theater. And I would look towards the medium of visual novels in particular to see how something relatively static can become more dynamic. I'll link a video in the Discord of that Phoenix Wright body language thing, because it has really good examples of like people cutting each other off, but it doesn't feel jarring. It feels like the natural flow. The challenge I would leave y'all with is playing with form. Play with how you present your dialogue. There was an observation about like having a question mark exclamation point, or with Dionysus's like, hey there, like there's things you can do to adjust how people receive what you're putting down. So for example, here's this twine game. It's a kind of complex twine game. And it's called Known Unknowns. And up until this point, everything has been in this format, more or less. But then you encounter a room of thick purple smoke, and it's scary and you're not sure what's going on, and you click through, and suddenly you're in a whole new kind of setting. You're in a whole new way of communicating. And I think that if you are mindful of how you use it, it can be such a powerful tool to suddenly switch things on your audience. So play with form is my challenge. There are things you can do that are relatively easy, like switching from this format to this format is inexpensive, but very effective at throwing somebody off and setting your tone. And I hope that all of that was useful. There are as many ways to talk as there are people on the planet, so your mileage will vary. I think keeping in mind like a person's history, the context around why they're talking or who they're talking to, the relationship they have, what they like would want out of a conversation, and especially tone, will all lead towards dialogue that serves you and whatever you're writing, in this case games, will serve you best. Thank you all for coming. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm always down to talk dialogue and narrative. So if any of y'all want to hit me up, you know where to find me. Let me know.
Nice. Cool. Oh wait, I need to get host privileges back, which I'm
let me
not
give you
sure.
Let me give you privileges.
There we go. I'm host again. Okay, cool. And I
Congratulations.
will go ahead and stop that recording.
Cool.